Hello, this is Brian. Today is Tuesday, June 30th, 2020. I am in the Angeles National Forest here with another episode of Spotlight on Trees. This is an episode I have been waiting to do for quite a while because of the fairly, it's a common but sporadic distribution of this tree here in Southern California's mountains. Today's focus is on the Pacific Ponderosa Pine, Pinus ponderosa, subspecies benthamiana. And I'm going to go more into detail about the scientific name because there is a lot of debate as to what the accepted scientific name is, but my information is based on Michael Kaufman's Conifers of the Pacific Slope. It's a small paperback book that's basically a field guide to all the native conifers from northern Baja California up through the Sierras into extreme southern British Columbia, which also includes little bits of Nevada and places like that. Now, Michael Kaufman lists it as Pinus ponderosa subspecies benthamiana, but there are other names, like I mentioned, that other botanists use, such as Pinus ponderosa variety pacifica, and in earlier videos, like videos from the last couple years, I was using variety pacifica, but I'm sticking with Michael Kaufman because I trust him. He's definitely a consummate conifer expert. And where I am today is I am at Charlton Flats at an elevation of 5,380 feet above sea level. And here we go. The Pacific Ponderosa Pine. When they get older, more mature, the plates break out on the bark. Pretty wide plates, and the color of the plates actually varies sometimes between different Pacific ponderosas. A lot of times they are characterized by wide yellow plates, and I've seen that quite often here in Southern California, but they also can have somewhat orangish plates like the tree I just showed you. This one here has the more stereotypical yellow colored plates developing. This is a fairly young tree here, but it is starting to break out into its yellow plates. And Charlton Flats, this area is predominantly Ponderosa Pine. I believe there are some jeffreys further up as you get closer towards Vetter Mountain. If you follow, not this road, but the road just up that way, you can follow all the way to the Vetter Mountain lookout at 5,908 feet. But I'm not going up that way because I want to show you these ponderosas. Ponderosa pines tend to be some of the very tallest trees here in Southern California, along with sugar pines. These trees here are anywhere from 120 to 140 feet tall, though even here in dry Southern California, I've seen them get much taller than this. I've seen them closer to 180 plus feet tall, mostly in the San Bernardino Mountains, the San Bernardino National Forest, but in a few spots here in the San Gabriels as well. Near Buckhorn Campground, there are some huge ponderosas there. Again, yellow plates. Now this is where we're talking about more mature trees. And I'm going to get back into the bark pretty soon. But you can see a lot of these trees, they have very conspicuous plates on their bark. A younger tree, a much younger tree, and I'm coming up on one now finally, the bark is much darker and furrowed, like this young Pacific Ponderosa right here. can see this young tree here has very, very dark furrowed bark. So the Ponderosa pine basically has a few different phases of its life. You have the blackjack phase. The blackjack phase is when the tree is young and the bark is dark, sometimes very dark gray and furrowed. Again, like this tree, very furrowed. The bark has not busted out into wide flat plates yet. So you can kind of tell. And I sniffed the bark, and it has just a, you know, typical piney smell, for the lack of a better term, of that young Ponderosa. I'm gonna go sniff the bark of these more mature yellow bellies. That's the next phase. The yellow belly is when the tree is mature and breaks out into plates. It's called the yellow belly phase. Now, I have read conflicting reports about the smell of the bark of the Ponderosa pine. Now, different subspecies of ponderosas occur basically throughout the entire western United States. Mexico, Canada, all the way up into the Black Hills of South Dakota. They're different, and those are different subspecies. Now, some people smell a vanilla-like odor coming from the bark of Ponderosa pine. I haven't had that experience. None of these trees I have sniffed so far have that vanilla smell. A lot of people from the Rocky Mountains, the Rocky Mountain races of Ponderosa pines, might have that vanilla smell, because I actually read that quite often. There's another tree here in California called the Jeffreyi pine, which is a fairly close relative of the Ponderosa, and it's supposed to give off a very sweet odor. Some people liken it to vanilla, and other people liken it to violets or pineapple, sweet, you know, like bakery cookies. But the Ponderosas here, and these are definitely Ponderosas, no doubt about it. These are not Jeffreyi pines. And Jeffreyi pines are quite similar. But let's look at a cone of a Ponderosa, because this is another identification detail that a lot of people use. Looking at the cones, let me see if I can get into a sunnier spot so you can get a better look at it. I always do this. I always hold it up, and then the detail looks fuzzy when I do these spotlight videos. Okay. If you look carefully enough, you can see the prickles stick down and out. And as I'm touching this, it's a little bit of a prickly sensation. So there's an old phrase called prickly ponderosa. And gentle Jeffrey. Ponderosa pines are typically fairly prickly to the touch. And generally, it's not always the case. There are always individual differences between trees, just like there are between people. Ponderosa cones are small to medium size, being smaller than Jeffreyi pine cones. These are all Ponderosa cones. The prickle sticks down and then out, kind of like this. So that's why if you pick up a Ponderosa cone, it's going to feel prickly to the touch. So this here is hardly an old growth stand, but it is a mature stand. Like I said, I have seen trees, especially in the San Bernardino National Forest, that get absolutely monstrous. Even, believe it or not, larger than most of the sugar pines I've seen. Sugar pine is reported as the king of pines, as for its height is insane. They can get to over 260 feet, but so can a Ponderosa. And I believe the world's tallest pine is actually a Ponderosa. But I guess on average, sugar pines are a little bit taller. So I would say it's pretty much a toss-up between Ponderosa and sugar pine. But here they are. These are young adult trees. So they still have fairly narrow crowns, which is fairly typical of younger and middle-aged ponderosas. Tall, pretty narrow, a lot of times a little more, a little narrower than a Jeffrey pine. Though Jeffrey pines can be quite narrow at times, I've seen it. But these ponderosas are very narrow. When they get older, much older, just like any other species of pine, they will flatten out on the top eventually. When they see this one right here is actually showing that right now. You can see the top is starting to flatten out on this ponderosa right here. Now, this video is specifically about Pacific ponderosa, so let me go into some more details about the Pacific ponderosa itself. The Pacific ponderosa is basically the subspecies that grows along the Pacific, and it basically ranges from, I want to say, San Diego County. There are some very fine stands of Pacific ponderosas in Lower Doane Valley or Lower French Valley. It's along the French Valley Trail. If you take the Lower French Valley Trail, you go through some thick canyon live oak and coast live oak forest, and you go out to this big meadow area where there's some very large ponderosas, a little bit larger than these actually, and they're considerably girthier in trunk. But these ones basically range from San Diego County, I believe as far north as Washington, British Columbia. I could be mistaken, but these are the ones that are closer to the coast, hence Pacific ponderosa. They also range up through the west slope of the Sierra Nevada, where they reach their largest size by far, well over 200 feet on the west slope of the Sierras. And then they also grow along the coast ranges, albeit maybe a little more scattered. And they grow up through Oregon and I believe into Washington, and eventually I think they get replaced by subspecies ponderosa, according to Michael Kaufman's book. So, generally, on a very general note, ponderosas are typically a lower elevation tree, and then Jeffreys take over higher up. In the Sierras, Jeffreys are typically an east slope tree. Not always, but they tend to be an east slope tree and upslope from the ponderosas. And that's beautiful. Here's a much larger ponderosa right here. Beautiful, perfect example of the yellow belly phase. Yellowish bark, very girthy tree. Well, it looks like the top broke off, I think. Yeah, I don't know, maybe it flattened out, but specimens like this are common along the along part of the Vivian Creek Trail in the San Gorgonio Wilderness. Usually here, I don't see ponderosas much above 7,000 feet. And I've seen them down as low as like 3,000, about 3,500 feet along 138, coming up from Silverwood Lake, going up in the San Bernardinos. So they can grow quite low elevations, even here in SoCal, where it's dry and hot. But another thing to note, they have their needles 3 in a bundle, like pretty much any other yellow pine. It's in the yellow pine belt, named after the Ponderosa, the Ponderosae. So they got their needles 3 in a bundle, like the Jeffrey pine, and also related to the Coulter and gray pines, also have their needles 3 in a bundle. Ponderosas can hybridize with Jeffreys, however, their period of pollination is different, so hybridization is not that common, to be honest with you. So here we are. Rich green color, 3 per bundle. That is typical for Pinus ponderosa subspecies benthamiana. Like I said, I'm using Michael Kaufman's name for it because I trust him. And just take a look at that. Pacific ponderosa. Thanks for watching. I will see you on the next episode.